Welcome to Season 2 of the Shop Stool Podcast, a podcast for woodworkers and the maker community in general. With Joey Chalk from King Post Timberworks, Bryan Cush from Sawdust Bureau, and Robin Lewis from RobinLewisMakes. Hi everyone, I hope you're all very well. This is episode number 15 of Season 2 of the Shop Stool Podcast. As always, I want to start by introducing my two co-hosts. Joey, how's it going today?
Very good. How are you, Robin?
Not too bad, can't complain. And Bryan, down in Melbourne, how are you?
I am excellent, thanks. Hope you guys are well.
That's good. So last time we talked, Bryan, you were sweating in the shop. Has there been a change since?
Yeah, it's cooled down a bit. It's a whole lot more temperate, about 35 degrees today, so lovely.
Jeez.
So it's a pleasant hot instead of a awful hot. Yeah. Awesome. And my name is Robin Lewis. Welcome to the show, everyone. We've got a pretty cool story. Well, not story, a pretty cool topic to talk about today. So last week we ended off the show with Joey saying that he had a couple of things that he still wanted to get into, but we decided to keep it as a full separate show. And the gist of it is when you are making furniture or building for a client, invariably things, well, maybe not invariably, maybe occasionally things go wrong, and you've got to deal with that as the maker.
Yeah.
So I guess looking at it from the perspective of these things do happen, what are your expectations as the builder, and what would we expect the client to, how would we expect the client to react? So Joey, did you have an actual, like, a story that you wanted to revolve this around?
I mean, I've been thinking about it for a while, in that I think, well, certainly I've always been really hard on myself. If I'm going to go and install whatever it is, a bookcase or something, anything built in especially, I expect I go there and I do it perfectly and then I get paid. Like, that's why I'm doing it. And I've just recently come to kind of realize that if the client calls me or emails me back saying, this is actually not quite is this finished, or this doesn't look like it's finished, or I don't like that this looks messy, I'm still working on it, but I'm really trying not to take it personally anymore. It's sometimes when you get the email, it feels like they've just slapped you across the face, like you did it on purpose or something, and they're calling you out or something. But I think a lot of the times it's just like, look, I'm not sure if this is meant to be like this, and now my approach is, okay, right, well, I'll come and have a look at it, send me a picture of it. If it's something like, I guess also, we're not perfect as makers, and sometimes you just forget to do something, and whether that is forget to put a little cap on a screw in a cupboard, or maybe you were meant to put some no more gaps somewhere and the day got away from you and you forgot to do that. There's lots of little things that happen on site. There's a lot going on in your brain trying to get everything done, especially with built-in units, where most of the time I only give myself the day to do it. And sometimes I just forget to do something. I've got to be called back to fix it. And I'm really trying not to take it so personally and feel crap about it, where I used to always just feel like I've been punched in the stomach and these people hate me now, and I don't think that's the case, even though I think that's how we sometimes take the message when it first comes across.
Because do you find yourself, because I would imagine there's two routes that you can take. You can take no, you're in the wrong, this is fine, everything's it's not your fault, but you're the one with the issue. Or you can take it as, why am I doing this? Clearly, I'm not worth my weight in salt. I shouldn't be a woodworker, and you take it upon yourself. So do you find you sort of lean more to one side or the other?
Well, I think there's probably another route, a third route in that, just like, okay, I probably should take that one on the chin. I stuffed up. And just admitting that, sometimes you just aren't perfect.
And that's sort of what you're saying you're getting better at now.
Yeah, I'm getting better at that. Like, it used to be, I think what you're saying is, for me, it was that first option where it used to be like, if you client, you don't know what you're talking about. I've just done, this awesome work. A lot of that is because I know all the trouble I went through to get you to where you are now. We might be 99.9% finished, and you're complaining about this last 0.1%, which was bloody hard work to get to that point. So I can't make it any better than that. But now you're complaining about it. That's what really hurts. But now I just think, well, if I explain the issue to them and then say, here's an alternative, or here's what we can do to tidy this part up, it makes life a lot less stressful all around. But I just feel like people, especially on Instagram and all these places, it's just all these perfect pictures of finished things, and no one ever seems to say, oh yeah, I did this install and everything went wrong, and now I've got to go rebuild it, and didn't get through the door, whatever it is. You don't see that much.
It's so funny, like when I first started woodworking, and especially when you're at those early days, and you're looking at all that perfection, it's really daunting, because you think that this person that you're looking at, they've decided, I'm going to design let's say a side table, and from start to finish it has been flawlessly executed, each step perfectly, and off they go. But the more I get into this, the more I realize that a big chunk of woodworking is problem solving and fixing mistakes, because those are going to happen. So it's how you resolve them that can really make or break. So I guess when you are installing in a house, like you've got to do that on the fly, on the day. There's no, go home and have a think, how am I going to do this? You've got to solve it then.
And that's, I think, for me, the most stressful part is actually getting in the van to leave, and I'm just going over and over all the steps that I need to do, every tool I'm going to need. I mentally go through the install and say, first I'm going to carry the unit in, and then I'm going to see if the skirting board needs cut down, so I might need my multi-tool, and then I need these sets of tools to do this, and then this happens, and then if everything turns to crap, and the worst case is that I'm probably going to need this set of tools to fix that, and I might need a spare piece of wood, so I'll go grab this in case, and I've got all this stuff just in case for the worst case scenario. And then invariably when you actually get there, none of those things happen, but something else happens which you completely didn't even think about, and you didn't even consider it. And then and that's what happened to me just the other day. I did this 6 meter long and built-in entertainment unit, which is the longest one I've ever done. It was not very tall, but the wall, it was only in a 10-year-old house. Well, a 10-year-old kind of basement built under an old villa, so it should be pretty good, you would think. But the wall was so terrible, in and out, every which way, like 20 mil this way, 20 mil that way, and there was no backing on this bookcase. And I just said to the client, look, I can't make this work. Like, I can't scribe every shelf and every vertical member. Like, we're kind of going for a mean kind of we're going to median gaps everywhere at the back, like, and they were actually like, that's fine, we're going to put books on it, I don't really mind if we've got some gaps against to the wall. So they were pretty nice that way. But I mean, it was just one of those things where you're like, there's no fixing this at this point, like unless we go back to rebuild it.
It is a tricky thing, the whole idea of a tradesman versus a craftsman. Craftsmen constantly trying to attain perfection, and the difficulties involved in that, like it's not something that's necessarily viable, and they're getting paid more than we are to do a slightly worse job a lot of the time.
That's a good point.
It's getting a higher rate.
Oh definitely carpenters make more than most furniture makers.
Absolutely.
Wow, okay, interesting.
Well, What would you reckon they're getting paid? Like 3-year apprentice or something?
You're asking me or Brian?
No, Brian.
I don't know anything about that.
Once you're qualified, like, you're looking over $100 an hour, depending on your experience. And you try to find me a furniture maker or
something outrageous.
Is that what the guy? I'm going to quit my job today. I should be a carpenter.
You should come be a plumber here as an apprentice. You're getting $75 now.
It's pretty good.
Yes. That's amazing money.
Yep. And they may not be getting that in their pocket if they're being subbed out, but they're getting bloody good wage. All they have to do is drive a van and...
Yeah, I mean... They don't really have the overheads that a furniture maker would have in terms of having a shop, having advertising costs, all that kind of stuff. They're just working as a contractor, so it's a pretty lucrative job.
Yeah, crazy.
Sure.
But in terms of actually making mistakes, I think it's really important as a furniture maker to make them and then learn how to sort of undo them. It's going to happen. It's the reality of working with a natural material that has different knots, different grain directions. You will get different tear outs and things. So it's just part of the job, and it's part of your experience learning as a craftsman.
Yeah.
So, so long as you're learning safely and you're not putting yourself at risk. Like, I keep a constant stack of offcuts behind my miter saw, and if I want to try out a new technique or joint, I'll do it on the offcut, whereas when I first started making furniture, I'd probably just go straight to the main piece, and you'll make a mistake and it'll cost you time and money, and you want to avoid that. So I like the idea of still making mistakes and still constantly learning, but just in terms of improving your time flow, it just makes sense to me to make those mistakes on a piece that isn't the finished article. Another thing as well, we do tend to judge ourselves pretty harshly. We really hold ourselves to account. Builders make mistakes all the time, and they only get picked up in defects reports, whereas we're sort of trying to do constant defects reports every time we cut something, every time we finish it. We're examining it and checking for mistakes, and it's a lot of pressure to put on yourself.
Joey, have you, now that you say that you feel like your approach is changing, are you finding your conversation and the way you deal with the client is also changing? Because your entire demeanor is a lot more relaxed about it. So is that affecting it, do you think?
I think what I tend to do now is try and spot all the problems that immediately, as soon as I walk into a room and I'm like, all right, that's going to be a problem, that's going to be a problem. And I tell the client, I'm like, these are all issues. I'm going to do whatever I can to make them not be issues. But if it comes to install day and this does become a bit of a problem and we've got to end up with something not fitting here or there, this is why. And I can't plan for it until the other part A is in place, and then I can measure for this little piece. And that just might be something you have to either pay extra for or wait and see. And, I'm a lot more open instead of, I think before I would try and be like uber professional and be like, I can come and do it and I can fix everything, I'm going to make it look perfect, and in my mind I'm going, crap, how am I going to get around that problem and do this?
Leave it to me, I will solve this. I am not keeper of all knowledge, and you don't need to talk to me at all. Gotcha. And
now I'm way more just I'm going to try it, and I'm going to tell you now it might not work, and if you're happy to go ahead with that, then let's go for it.
So I guess you're sort of priming them to the idea that
failure
there
is
a
option.
Chance.
Failure is an option.
And I would be pretty similar. Like with my clients, I do less sort of built-in work and more freestanding work. So my main issues are either delivery, which I've covered before, and when I had the steel frame that wouldn't fit through the door, and the whole drama of bringing it back, cutting it out, working a mechanism where it would fit. That's one issue that I have. The other one is finishes. So trying to explain to a client that timber, no matter what the finish on it is not indestructible. Explaining the difference between a hard wax versus a varnish, which I don't use varnishes because I'm constantly in the fear of the scratch, the water gets underneath, the whole thing lifts, whereas I like the hard wax being able to sort of spot repair bits. But just trying to explain to them, don't leave a vase on a timber table, it will ring, it will leave a black mark. Also paint finishes on steel, like I've done a few for commercial spaces and they just get battered, so there's not much you can do about that except explain to them this may have to be sandblasted and repowder coated in 3 to 4 years depending on how you treat it. But I was talking to a friend at the weekend and an idea came to me, only offer my steel pieces in one finish, and it's like that boiler black, that heat proof epoxy black,
like matte black.
That stuff is indestructible. And I was like, that would save me so much hassle. So
is that? Do you think that's more durable than a powder coat, or you
I think it is, because
you could repair it.
Yeah,
you think?
I think so, because even if it's a satin powder coat, scratches, like smudge scratches, show on it. Like they change the whole texture of the finish a bit. If you go matte powder coat, I find that every single tiny little scratch shows in it. And then if it's outdoors, it obviously starts to rust. Whereas that boiler black is brilliant in terms of protection and aesthetics. So,
have you had people complain like on a footrest or something where it gets worn and like the powder coating weird?
The side legs of tables were the big ones that I'd had. I did some for for South Melbourne Market. They wanted, I think it was 16 or 17 big high bar tables, and they bought steel stools from another. I can't remember if it was a maker or they were imported, but they're steel stools. So the steel stools are constantly getting slammed into the sides of the legs and chipping the paint. And you go back, and I think I went back 2 years after the job, and I was like, it looks really shitty. Like if they just asked me some advice on stools, I would have said, pick something with a softer edge to it. Even a timber stool isn't going to damage them as much. But you can only offer advice. You can't really tell them what to do.
I often get clients asking about the finishes, like you were saying about the hard wax or urethane or what should we have, and I like oils and for the fact that you can apply them really easily, and I usually what sells it to the client is that they can. I say to them, look, if you in 5 years, 3 years, if you want to refinish it, you can just rub on some oil yourself and redo the top. And most clients are like, yeah, great, I love that idea that I can redo it myself. And inevitably I end up doing that though. They wouldn't do it themselves. Have you ever said to a client they can do it themselves, or it's easy maintenance? Or if I'm doing a coffee table and I suggest Danish oil as a finish because I really like the luster of it, when it's not a terribly high traffic piece, like if it's just a coffee table, I'm like, it's going to give you a really nice finish, and in a year's time, 18 months time, you can give it a light sand and oil it and just watch the timber rejuvenate. I don't know of any client that's ever done it. No, I don't think they do.
I might be wrong, but they like the idea, we're connecting with the piece. But in terms of the actual...
absolutely. I get to put some of myself into it, and that must be quite a nice thing.
But who knows? Maybe they do it. They just don't tell me. But I'm trying to think of any. I did one fit out job for a combi van. He owns a combi that he mainly takes to shows. He doesn't use it to camp that often, and the client wanted it to be more of a lounge that he could sort of sit in the combi, but also make it that he could take it camping. So it had a rock and roll bed, and it was essentially we ripped out all this high, deep cabinetry, which left a very, very dark, confined combi space. Ripped it all out, put in a banquette along the end that's facing the sliding door as you come in. And I was talking about materials to the client. I was like, it kind of has to be plywood in terms of the heat that, I can't really put solid timber in here. It has to be plywood in terms of stability. Weight-wise, I don't want to put in anything too thick and too heavy. I might have to hollow some bits out. And then I was like, right, people are going to be sitting on this banquette. It's going to get scratched to buggery. So I'm like, how do I hide the scratches in a sheet of plywood? So I ended up using laminated ply, so edge laminated. So the striations were kind of running. Cool. Let me get this right. The striations were running horizontal, so perpendicular to the length of the banquette.
Okay, yeah.
And I had he had bought an electric freezer that would sort of sit in, and I created this ridiculously complicated system. Due to the curvature of the combi, you couldn't have a lid that opened that would allow the lid of the fridge to open. So it was a sliding lid on hidden tracks that I made out of aluminium and nylon. It came forward and dropped flat against the front of the banquette. Right. Tell me am I making sense?
Yeah, vaguely.
Sliding panel comes out, comes forward, pulls towards you, drops down flat.
Yeah.
But 6 months later, he came to me and he's like, it's not working anymore. And I'm like, explain to me what you mean it's not working anymore. And he's like, the lid isn't in the tracks at all. Like I can see a gap between it. And I hadn't expected it, and the plywood company definitely hadn't told me it would happen. But when you laminate plywood vertically like that, it starts to behave like natural timber again. So it will shrink. across the grain.
Right.
So this panel was probably about 800 mil wide, and it had shrunk by about 8 or 9 mil.
Jeez.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh shit. Obviously, like in the combi on a 40-degree day, if that thing's parked up and not being used, all the windows closed, it could be 50, it could be 60 inside.
It's basically an oven.
It could be way more,
So it's extreme situation, but I was like, God, how am I going to do this? So I ended up having to get him to bring it back. I had to remake 2 lids in it, and I did it. I put sort of breadboard ends. Just kind of try to keep it flat on plywood. And a year and a half later, and it's still good. It still works.
Oh, that's good. Jeez.
But, I mean, that's something I could never have pre-planned. It's not the client's fault because, I was the one that suggested the material. It's not really the manufacturer's fault because they wouldn't sort of test it to those conditions.
Yeah,
but it's just one of those things.
Outside of the parameters, yeah.
So it's just one of those things that I have to wear the cost on, I have to wear the time on, but ultimately it has to get fixed.
That's interesting. Actually, just made me think about when you said breadboard ends. Just a little while ago, I made a walnut table that was just like a walnut slab, and it had like 2 kind of legs, 2 flat panel legs. I'm not sure if you remember, I made a video about it. It's very simple. It's only like 3 pieces of timber kind of joined together to make this walnut table. Anyhow, I had breadboard ends on it, and the lady just called me up the other week and said, "Oh, look, the table's shrunk." And I said, "Yep, that's what's meant to happen." And she knew it was going to happen, and she's like, "Yeah, I just want you to know that it's shrunk and it's not going back again." And I was like, "Yeah, well, the weather's changing, it's summer, whatever. Most likely, in our climate in Auckland, what I find is material shrinks and stays shrunk once it's in a house."
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't really expand, although it kind of does, but no, it doesn't come back to where it was. But with a breadboard end, you have to stop working at some point. You can't just keep trimming things.
How do you guesstimate what the weather is in your shop, and sort of do you trim it slightly proud or slightly short?
That's right. So so she's got, and it's about a 1.5 mil shrinkage on 4 corners. Which was nice and even, which was nice. But she's like, I don't like the sharp edges. That's the little 1.5 mil step on the side. She's like, catch my jumper on it, or she catches her hand on it. So she's like, can you come and take the corners off, arris that sharp corner off? And so I'm like, yeah, I can do that. But if the table expands back to where it was, if you ever shift house or whatever happens, who knows, it hasn't even been a year yet, you haven't done a full season cycle, you're going to have these weird little notches on the sides where the breadboard end meets, and there's no other arises anywhere else on the tabletop, so it's going to look strange. But I mean, she's just hounding me to get it done. Like, I'm just constantly emails, when are you coming? And so she's an hour away from me, and she wants me to make a special trip just to go and take 4 swipes with a chisel, and I'm like, I can't do it like that. You're going to have to wait for me to come when I'm in your area, and then I'll pop in. And she's like, yeah, but that's not going to work with my schedule and all that kind of rubbish. And so
maybe she likes your company. She just wants you to visit every spring and every autumn, and you can take a bit off and add a bit on.
Yeah, who knows?
Is she totally okay with the understanding, though, that this is the natural life cycle of the table? So she's not saying, like, you need to come and fix it. She's saying...
No, she's saying, I get it, and we talked about it, but now that it's happened, I kind of don't like it.
Okay, gotcha.
And I'm like, that's cool. It hasn't been a full year yet. You might want to give it a full, 4 seasons, and then see if it comes back out. Who knows what's going to happen. I agree that it's a little sharp edge, but, like... come on, that's the piece of wood.
Did she indicate that she'd be willing to pay for you to come, or was she expecting?
No, she's definitely of like, you made this, you have to make it right, and I can see already that in 5-10 years I'll be getting calls for this little things on the surface and fixing this and fixing that. So
that's a tricky one.
It will be interesting.
Well, it shouldn't be a tricky one, because it should be a case of this was explained to you.
Yeah,
your problem.
So clients can be a bit tricky with wording, so we were talking earlier about comebacks. So I did this job recently where I fitted out a wardrobe, pretty basic really, but there was one part of it where I made quite a kind of almost like a room divider out of like a vertical louver out of some solid ash, and getting it into place between two walls was very difficult. The plastering on the house was a little off, and there was architraves in the way and some odd geometry, and so we had to trim a very small amount off. It's hard to describe, but we had to trim a little bit off this louver to get it into place, and then it left a tiny little gap between. There's about a 2 millimeter gap between the wall and one of these louvers in one spot, just one little part. Anyway, so I did the install, went away, and this always happens too. This is classic. You deal with the wife just about for everything, and then when there's a problem, the husband gets on the email and starts emailing.
Was this the legal action from last year?
No. This is a different one.
Wow.
So he's like, I don't like the gap. You need to come fix that. I don't like where you've put screws. You need to come fix that. And I don't like something else. So I'm like, okay, wait, the screws, that's where there's wood in your ceiling. That's where we had to put some screws. There's no other wood. Can't do anything about it. We put some little ash veneer caps over the screws, and a couple of them had started, one of them had unpeeled a little bit or something, and so he told me I had to glue all of the caps down, so did that. And so I ended up compromising with him. Well, not compromising, but I said, okay, I'll make a little kind of tiny little architrave, so to speak, to cover this gap where this louver meets the wall. I can't really do much else about it. And he's like, yeah, that sounds like a good compromise. So I did that 2 days after the install. I went back, fixed it up. And
at this stage, you guys are still friendly, everything's very civil,
and we're still,
no problem.
As far as I know, we're still friendly, except I haven't heard from him. It's been 8 days since I fixed it. He won't return my emails, and he owes me $2,000 for the final payment. And I'm like, I kind of would like to get paid at this point, and you're not even saying boo to me, whether you liked the repair or you didn't like the repair, or, so,
yeah.
Hey, it's a tough one. I'm not sure where I go if I just don't get a reply. You can only do so much.
Man, I was horrified talking to the builders who did the renovation to my place. They were saying, and you'll probably be able to agree with this, Joey, if you know the answer, but here in Australia, in Queensland, the QBCC, so the Queensland Building Commission or whatever it is, they're the ones who set out the standards, and they're also the ones that you get your license, your building license. When building work takes place on my property, the QBC will insure me for any damages. So if there's damages, I can go to the QBCC and claim on those damages. But if I don't pay the builders, they can do nothing. There is no recourse. They've got to do some kind of legal action. There's no insurance that the builders can take out if I decide to be an arsehole and walk away.
I need to process that a little bit. Okay, so because they're on the builder's side, essentially. So they are, because they're giving their licenses out, they stand behind their builders, is the way I take that. And they're kind of like saying, we think the builders are doing a good job unless you prove otherwise. So if you pay them and at least they're paid, then we'll look at your claim, and that way the cash flow is, money's going around.
It was more from the perspective of if in the builder-client relationship, if anything goes wrong with the building process, I have insurance for it.
Yeah.
If anything goes wrong with the client, like the client just decides to not pay you, the builder's stuffed. There's no recourse. That's why they often just go out of business and then start up a new business. And I was horrified because I've just assumed that the builder would have his own insurance, that if I don't pay, he can claim on that, then the insurers come after me.
Yeah, I think it's quite difficult to have insurance that way. It's probably prohibitively, whatever that word is, expensive. I know, like, for example, most tradies keep all their tools in their van or ute, and they've got 20 grand worth of tools probably sitting around in their van or ute, but it's so absurdly expensive to insure it while it's living in the vehicle that it's not worth it. It's actually cheaper just to buy a new set of tools, or if and when it gets broken into or stolen. And so it could be that. So here, like, if my client just straight up refuses to pay me, I will just end up taking them to court. Small claims court. It was just, I think the limit of it is worth, I think, $30,000. Anything over that, and it's a different category. But you just essentially stand in front of a judge and plead your case, and they just make a decision on the spot.
But you've got to fork out for that, though.
I believe it's only $150 admission fee, kind of court processing fee.
Okay, all right. So that's not actually too bad then.
It's not crazy, like you've got to hire a lawyer or anything crazy. I could take advice privately, and lawyer could tell me what I should and shouldn't say, I suppose, and then it would be up to me to go and do it privately. Myself in the courtroom, represent yourself. I don't want to go down that road. To me, it's actually less hassle, depending on how much money is worth. What I'm actually owed.
Yeah.
By the time you take a couple of days off work and do all the other stuff you have to do, it starts adding up anyway. What the cost is going to be, how much you're getting back, even though it's a principal thing. At some point, some people just win out by being assholes.
Yeah. Whatever happened with that legal case?
What was that job?
At liberty to talk?
They just walked away. Haven't heard from them.
That was the Australians living in the house. Yeah.
That was the wardrobe unit where the lady changed I asked the lady if she wanted to use a different product, and she said yes, and the husband was quite furious about the change.
He said no. So it just walked away, huh?
Yeah, haven't heard anything back, so I'm sure he's bad-mouthing me around town. That's what he said he was going to do, so I'm not sure.
Sure. Yeah, interesting. So, Bryan, just going back, we talked a little bit of, you touched on earlier your those steel legs that you had to painstakingly take apart when you realized that they weren't going to fit through the opening.
Yep.
Was the client aware of that you were going through that?
Yeah.
Having to do that process? And they were okay with that, as long as, did you find when you had the conversation that the relationship started to go a bit sour because now they were like, oh, who's this guy? He doesn't know what he's doing.
It went a little bit sour because there was 2 other jobs potentially in the pipeline for them. And they suddenly became, despite me having previously quoted ballpark figures to do the work, once I had completed and installed that job, they miraculously disappeared. They became too expensive. I don't know. It's really hard to say. The fault was their fault. They were definitely at fault because they provided me with a floor plan which didn't match the true measured dimensions. But I talked through the changes with them on the spot, and I was like, this is the only thing that I can think of that will work to fit this table. And it will take me way longer than what I'm going to charge you for, but I want to make sure the piece gets in. It's no good to me. How am I going to just resell this huge bespoke table that's been made for you?
Did the client end up paying for some of that rework?
They did, yeah. I mean, I think I charged them $400.
Jeez.
And that included me getting the pieces that didn't fit back down through an apartment building into the lifts, into my van, taking on all that extra risk that, if it slips and damages the paintwork, that's my fault again. Getting it out in my workshop, cutting it, adding a bracket. It probably ended up being nearly a full day's work in my workshop. And then
another install day.
Another 2 hours worth of driving back and forth to their apartment and installing it. So yeah, it was pretty frustrating. Especially then you think you're going out of the way to help, and then the other jobs evaporate.
So this kind of leads on a little bit, I think, to contracts. Not that I want to dive deep into contracts, but I've just, in the last end of last year, I started with a proper contract thing. I say proper. It's just my ramblings, but they cover the points that seem to happen most often, like little bumps and scrapes on a wall. Like, it's not my fault if we accidentally take a tiny little piece of paint off your wall, things like that. And in that is, I've got essentially a clause saying, if you're going to make a change, it's happening in writing, and if I've already started work on it, I'm probably going to charge you more work to change it. Going to charge you more money to make that change, because of possibly already, it's too late. They've already cut a piece of wood or whatever. Sometimes you can't make wood longer. So, is that something that you have in place? Any like change? Like there's a massive thing where people suddenly decide that it needs to be black instead of white.
I haven't actually had any clients change a piece halfway through the build.
Wow.
I've wanted to change pieces,
Okay.
but I'll only raise that with a client if I think it is of significant importance to, maintaining the lifespan of the piece or something. If it's a slight aesthetic change that I think will make it look better, I generally won't take it on, unless the piece, I think I mentioned it before, unless the piece is for me, and then I will constantly make aesthetic changes in the workshop. But yeah, if it's changing a piece with a client, I feel as though the 50% deposit that I charge is based on the drawings as signed off on this, and you signed here, and that is what you will get.
That's so.
So go on, Joey.
Like I used to rely on the drawings as well. I say, this is what you're going to get, and I would do everything I could to stick to it. But inevitably there would be small changes of things that I didn't realize would need to be done when I made the drawing, and they're so small that it's not worth, and no one's going to notice it. But if they really sat down with the magnifying glass, they could go, right, that's different to the drawing. And so then that's when I really started kind of thinking, what is it? Because you said you'd have some kind of creative input a little bit. And do you worry that small amount of creative input is going to change what the end client is going to say? Hey, that's not actually what you drew. I really like that little square detail, and you've gone and rounded it over.
What I send the client, so I build a 3D model of all my pieces that includes a lot of the detailing in the 3D model. The clients don't get working drawings.
No.
They don't see every joint.
No.
Like, it will be a render, and it'll have sort of little dot points to it explaining what the joint will look like. Say bridle joint or a lap joint or something like that. And then it will have a material swatch saying Vikash or whatever, and it will have the overall dimensions on the piece. And so long as I stay within those boundaries, I feel as though I'm fulfilling my end of the contract. If I want to make a change to, say, the underside of the table, or the way the tabletop connects, or the way a shelf fits in or something, I don't feel as though I need to consult a client on that, because generally I'm making the changes not to make it quicker or cheaper, but generally to make it better, more consistent. If I felt as though I was cutting a corner, I probably would say to the client, and I would tell them why I was doing it. I'd be like, I'm going to take time out of this end of the project, but I'm going to put it back into this end by doing something else down here. So I find that's easier than trying to renegotiate a fee and variation costs.
Often with small changes, I'm the same. I tend to kind of quote unquote risk it, because it's such a small thing aesthetically compared to the whole of the unit. Like you say, if it's some kind of weird internal thing, a shelf goes here and instead of here, or there's some issue with hardware, then I'll just deal with it. I'll make the change necessary, and I've never actually really had anyone come back to me saying that's different. But there's a possibility there that they could go, hey, wait a minute, this isn't actually what you said it was going to be, and that always scares the crap out of me. But I think it's just part of making stuff.
It's part of that trust that you have with the client as well. They've got to trust you to a degree.
And it's the fact that we're the rule where we are designing the thing and making the thing, whereas if you're a builder building something that's been designed by an architect, and you build it exactly how the architect has designed it, you're not responsible for it. You can do as good a job. You've done a beautiful job, but the client isn't happy with it. Not your fault. Architect's fault. Or if the architect has designed it and the builder doesn't build it, it's the builder's fault. So there's always accountability. Whereas the fact that we are primarily one-man designer makers, it all falls on our shoulders.
I will say, over here, 10, I guess it's 20 years ago now. We had this whole leaky house issue. They had the similar one in Canada, and so we had this cladding system that was terrible. A lot of builders got taken to court, even though they were following the manufacturer's specs and the architect's directions. The individual builders were taken to court to say that they did poor workmanship, and it just got to a point where it's like, hey, we're just following the rules. At the time, the issue was that if you were the builder and you knew there was a better way to do it, you couldn't do it without making changes to the plans and going through. The architect would have to, submit different drawings and things, and so the builder would say, well, the architect knows what he's doing, we're going to do it the architect's way. Now that's changed, and if you come across something as a builder that you don't feel meets regs or isn't the best way to do it, you're kind of obliged to change it and go through the process, and you've got to sign it off as a builder that this is the change I made and all that kind of rubbish. So it's a whole different route of accountability because of the whole leaky home situations that we had. But yes, I take your point.
It's a grey area.
Yeah.
Like, it's a grey area for us as makers because, like, code and standards and things apply to some things and not other things. Like, when you're making a piece that's considered art, it obviously doesn't have to take into account the same rules and regs. Whereas, like, the piece, like the cribs you've just finished, the crib I've just finished, you're obviously really strung by regulations, and you have to abide by them. Otherwise, you will find yourself in court pretty quickly. So, but yeah, it's an interesting thing how it differs between different industries. Yeah,
that's right.
So we're gonna have to call it a show soon. But before we do that, talking about the cot, Bryan, have you finished it? It's all done, completed.
Last coat is going on today, and it's getting installed tomorrow, and done. And I'm still videoing it for YouTube. I don't know how the hell you guys do that. That is such a pain in the ass. So many bits I forget to set up the camera for, and I'm like, shit. And then I have to go back and kind of either undo it and redo it, or sort of set it up with scraps of timber just to show the intention. But trying to capture a whole piece start to finish, it's hard.
It's a pain in the ass.
I'm working on an island bench at the moment, and my clearances when I put it together were just a little bit off, so I had to cut my legs down from about 85 square stock to 70, and then redo the mortises and the tenons. And my first thought was, I've made a mistake, I've got to go back and finish this. But I don't have to film it because it doesn't make any sense in the video. So I could just be a free woodworker again.
Yeah, that's... I'm just started filming a job like yesterday, and I've got to cut down. So this guy brought me in all these slabs of New Zealand grown walnut, being air dried, and somebody in the past had made this beautiful media unit console, really nice finger joints on it and everything. He shifted house, the movers dropped it out of the back of the truck, and just the whole thing just fell apart, just racked it on the angle, and all the finger joints popped and everything kind of broke. So he said, can we I want to make a tabletop out of all these nice bits. There's some really nice crotch veneer, crotch grain pieces and curly pieces and stuff you don't really get here. And so I've said, the only way we can really do this is if I cut all these big bits down and or make veneers, and I'll press it onto some plywood for your tabletop. And so I've been filming that, but it's been a while. It feels to me like it's been a while since I filmed something, and I keep doing the same thing. I keep getting halfway through a cut and like, crap, stop, got to get the camera, set it up at least when I'm halfway through the cut, and then carry on. So there's a few steps that I've missed out, but whatever. At this point, it's too late.
A lot of overhead. Well, I for one am definitely looking forward to that video, Bryan. Do you know when it's going to be out?
2020.
Good one.
All right, you heard it here first. We're gonna hold you to that.
Yeah.
One video a year, that's good, man. You get like a $100,000 a year sponsor, that'd be good.
All right,
Yeah.
let's call it a day. So, to everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please go ahead and give it a rating on iTunes. That really does help us out. The Shop Stool Podcast is available on iTunes and most other podcast apps. My name is Robin Lewis. Joey and Bryan, thanks very much for hanging out today. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you in the next show.
Sweet. See ya.
Cheers, guys. Bye.